Welcome to the Spiritual Sexual Shamanic Podcast, exploring sacred sexuality, the activation of life force, and empowered transformation. These intimate conversations take you under the sheets with faculty from ISTA, the International School of Temple Arts. I'm your host, Simon Marvell, apprentice faculty with ISTA. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Sexual Shamanic. What are we? The Sexual Shamanic Spiritual Podcast. It's been a while. Today's episode. In today's episode, I'm talking with Ashisha, who's one of the facilitators in the International School of Temple Arts. This is our podcast, and believe it or not, people let me do this. Ashisha has been learning and thriving through images and imagination all her life, which took her to careers in theatre, journalism, and filmmaking, a wild ride through uncountable versions of personal life and creative reality on this planet. More than 20 years of storytelling has taught her that the true stories that can advocate change in our lives need to be found inside ourselves and in our direct connection to our creative source. She's traveled the globe to find the universal language turned towards the imagination of the heart, the language of the inner space. Arpana, Ashisha, as we usually call her, is cultivating and teaching ancient tools for awakening the imagination of the soul into sound, form, and life force by using mythology and archetypal images, alchemical methods, meditation, and embodiment for creative transformation. Her sessions, trainings, and ceremonies support people worldwide in dreaming their future into existence. Ashisha, wonderful to have you with us.
Thank you, Simon. I'm honored to be here. Yeah.
So good. We've been planning for so long to have this
That's
chat.
right.
And you've been in Bali and different places, and we were in Mexico together, and it just never worked out. So today's the day. It's an auspicious occasion.
Oh my God. Let's see what we make of it. Yeah.
Yeah. So we kind of agreed to just have a chat and see where it goes. But really the guiding intention, I guess, that we've been holding for some months now is to talk about mythology. Even just reading through your bio, it's clearly a significant part of your current teaching and also of your life and your career up until this point. So maybe just to kick us off, when you hear the word mythology, when I sort of say it back to you as being something that seems to be clearly important in your life and teaching, what kind of thoughts, ideas, images, feelings does it evoke in you?
It evokes most strongly the sense of imagination, which is something that I find is so incredibly necessary in times like this, when there is uncertainty of who we are as humans and where do we take ourselves, even in the personal life. What is our purpose on this planet? So to find a relationship with a greater theme, an archetypal note, allows us to connect to something that's beyond our littleness, our individual separate self. And by doing so, we link into a consciousness that is holding wisdom and love for our endeavors, and that we can use as a current to move forward and be guided by accessing something that's connecting us not just to other humans, but to the the planet itself, to nature, to the cosmos, to the stars, to something that's like a unifying principle of life expressing itself on this planet. And so it unites us. It becomes a vehicle for us to move together as one on the trajectory of bringing a new culture in, of bringing a new paradigm to this planet. Yeah. So mythology is for me a means to step out of the separation, of the individual loneliness, the personal frustration of what do I do with my life, and giving a deeper sense of, how do I make meaning? How do I connect to something that is unifying and a life force that is actually a current that is running through, many beings in the sense of, like a plant is a being, a star is a being. And how do we communicate with each other?
Wow. So it sounds like, you began talking about imagination, which is like this hypothetical almost realm that we might say could lead to future reality. Like we imagine what we want our future life to be like, for example. And you seem to be saying that mythology is somehow linked to that, to being able to imagine a new way of being, a new life for ourselves, for our communities. But maybe a lot of people would think of mythology as referring to the past, old ideas, received stories, the way civilizations used to do things. I think it'd be a common way of thinking to say, like in ancient Greece, they had myths and legends, or in indigenous cultures, they didn't have science, so they had myths. They were sort of undeveloped. But we know more now. We have the scientific way of, we can see things as they really are. So like in that way of thinking, mythology is kind of located in the past, and maybe we think about myths as nice stories. But you're saying there's a link between mythology and imagination, which is maybe more oriented towards the future. How do you reconcile that, if you do,
See, I'm based in Greece, in this island Samothraki at the moment. And the Greeks had, two concepts. There was logos and there was mythos. And logos is, the thinking path. It's the way our mind manages to understand and make meaning of life. And the other path is the mythological path, which is linked to imagination. Imagination that is kind of more a revelatory pathway. So, like with the scientific path, it's a beautiful path, and they're equal, in the tradition. So they coexist, and that's something that I feel we need to bring back into our modern day life. Is this feeling of we have a strong, scientific approach to life, and not so much an imaginatory approach to life, mythological approach to life. We often outsource the imagination to other people. We outsource it to Hollywood and these kinds of, authors of great stories of the Game of Thrones and these kinds of things. But the imagination, like the direct revelation that comes through each of us, is something that we have a little bit forgotten. And that's something like, it's almost like reclaiming from the ancients, as you say, their knowledge that both parts are needed. Just like we have, two parts of the brain that are like the left side of the brain has a different task than the right side of the brain. And if they are equally developed, then we can function as a whole. Then we can, connect to the world in a feminine and a masculine way. And that opens up a greater capacity for moving in wholeness and holiness, And the fact that, I agree with you that often myths are located in the past, and some people say, but this, the story goes like that and not like that. And it's something that actually developed more through the Christianity or through the monotheistic religions, let's say, that there is a one true storytelling. The Greeks, for example, were grafting their stories. There's 100 versions of each myth. So you can see that over the centuries, the gods and goddesses evolved, new adventures happened to them. And you can track back what that reflected about their society. So, maybe nowadays when we look at, let's say, Athena, she would have a different expression than, 1,000 years ago. And there's a freedom in doing that. It's not a sacrilege to take these old stories and work with them and see what's true nowadays for us. There's also a tradition in the Hebrew Kabbalistic spiritual path that works with the, totally freeing ourselves from the word as it is written, but going deeply into the word and seeing what it reveals in this very moment. So to be up to date and find the living myth rather than, an old tale that we repeat. That's what I'm passionate about. Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. Is there maybe a time in your life, maybe a point, an experience where you started to have this realization that this is how myths are maybe supposed to work for us? Like in your own personal experience, how did you come to understand that myths are not just old stories that we kind of for no reason enjoy retelling, but they can actually be useful in this way, and that it's not sacrilegious to update them and explore what different archetypes might actually be in this day and age? When did you sort of start to come and realize this?
The way I grew up, I played a lot with, just taking stories. Like I grew up in the Austrian mountainside in a very small village. There was not much around to play with. So the imagination was the toy, you can say. And so I've been, doing that since I can think, very innocently. And later, then going to school and university, there was a kind of sense like, oops, maybe that's not right, because people put copyright on things, there's a name written under something, so you shouldn't really work with that. And, like authors have or even playwrights have their way, and whenever something is performed and a new director comes and puts a play on stage, like in Vienna, there's a huge uproar if that's interpreted quite freely. And the audience goes away like saying, like, that shouldn't be like that because Shakespeare wrote it like this. That's also a just perspective, because I trust that many of these great authors have put a lot of care into how they transmit it and put a certain word and a certain aspect. And having said that, and there is something that requires us, because it's life, it's alive. It's in a life, the way I look at words and at creativity, at books and at every form of artistic expression is like something that's outpouring like a flower. And it's for us there to take this scent and this fragrance and morph it to something, further. So there is no end to creativity. It's not like boxed. We have come here to be the creators, and we have come here to let it move it through our bodies. which brings me to the point of embodiment, because these myths, as long as they are, dryly sitting there in books in their, solidified way, they're quite crystallized. The moment we take them and allow them to move them into ourselves, into our words, into our sound, something comes to life that has its own life, really. So there is a way, and that's something that I call, that our soul is almost absorbing ancient tales, and by vibrating them through our system, they come to life, and they start speaking their own tongue, and they start expressing in their own movements, and that way they reveal to us something authentically from within, through our senses, through our perceptions, which informs us and gives us a pathway on, wow, this is authentic life, and it's not something copied. I'm longing for a world where we're not just copying thoughts that have been thought before. I'm longing for a world where, every thought is like original as far as we can, where every movement we make is something that is birthed out of this very moment, out of this unique being that we are, because we're 8 million unique beings on this planet. And if we give up this sense of being separate and holding on to the restrictions of that, but feeling ourselves as a unique expression of the one life, we can add to it and paint our different colors on this canvas of life.
So fascinating. And it seems striking to me that children seem to know something about what you're talking about, this idea of embodying the myths and the stories. Maybe they hear a story from their parents or their sibling, their friends or something like that, and they almost immediately imagine themselves as being part of that story, and they start dancing as one of the characters in that story. They start imagining and sounding out what that story might sound like, what the characters are saying. They almost instantly get it. They get the wisdom of it. And as you said, there seems to be some kind of conditioning involved where we renounce that power for other reasons. Like we get told, oh no, it's not our story. We're not allowed to have a part in that. Stop pretending. So is that how you see it? That I hear people say this a little bit. Like children have this wisdom kind of intuitively. Is there a sense that we could be learning from children in that sense, like just how easily they pick up and play?
Absolutely. Or remember our own child, like sitting with a flower and just being in deep communion with that being and becoming it, and feeling how a rose feels different from the inside than a daffodil. And we can all sense that. But then, like, how do I speak as a daffodil, than as a rose, or an animal, whatever, I think it's very much a soul expression, mythology and the connection to all forms of reality, all forms of matter, you can say. There is our personality, which is like the persona, the mask, which is being more and more conditioned the older we get, and finding more and more ways, that work quite well in the world. And so that mask takes on a shape that expresses a certain way of being, and we get used to that. And that becomes the way we are, and we believe that. And we forget more and more that as a soul, we can play and have choices of experiences you can say almost beings of nature and beings of celestial beings that can move through our bodies in the world and express themselves. And our soul knows how to use them and choose them and play with them and be a true creator and a magician from that place.
Can you say more about the soul? How do I feel my soul? How do I trust that it's my soul moving in this way and not maybe just another mask?
Yes. Well, it's a journey, like it's an initiatory path to move from, the conditioned mask that we all carry to a place from living from a deeper place. And I feel the soul is kind of, we can see it as a bridge, really, that connects us to a place where we know we are, that place that all traditions know as the place of the empty or the everything, the everything or nothingness. That place needs to be accessed via a bridge, and that bridge is the soul, the mythological path, the way we feel we are actually part of a stream of energy. And when we feel inside and feel a connection to something greater, to the world soul, when we feel we are truly part of life itself, and there's moments I'm sure everyone has when we're hearing the cicadas at night and maybe the rain, and we feel that it is us and it's not something outside of us. That's probably when our soul is making itself heard, or the stirring of the soul when we relate to a great poem that touches us deeply, not just on a mental plane that we understand some clever words, but something that moves us to tears without us being able to explain what it is. Carl Jung spent so many years having a conversation with his soul, like when you read the Red Book, it's just like, who are you? So it's hard to answer, who are you, when you ask your soul, but it is an inquiry, a meditation practice. It's a longing, and I think that's where it starts, when the heart opens and thinks like, or feels, what am I really here for? What's the reason for this life? What's truly moving through me? And when these questions arise like a deep urgency that is begging, praying for an answer, then that being is stirring inside. And then a dialogue can start with the soul saying like, who are you? And then with the continuous demand, almost, the soul will respond more and more. And the soul responds very much on this archetypal mythological level, like we begin more and more to see the deeper layer of existence. We can communicate with a tree, an animal, the sea. And by deep listening, we hear something about life that's reflecting something back to us about who we are. And the body plays, like our embodiment plays a big role in that as well, I feel, because often we think we're just thinking that, it's just all fantasy and up there. But true imagination sits in the heart, doesn't sit, it's a different quality than fantasy that makes something up, something that becomes clear from within. And as it does, it also transmits into the body. And if we allow and give permission to the body to move in that current, and that's a part also of the wisdom that I feel that lies in the teachings of ISTA, is to give the permission to the body to move in its authentic ways, and express from deeper within after having found that current, something that moves through, so that the soul actually can find its place and take roots inside, our flesh.
What this brings up for me in this moment is how amazing that can feel when we get a glimpse of it, when we feel this moving, maybe for the first time. Or we have a significant extended experience of the soul moving through us. And maybe our access to that is, as you say, embodying a myth. We hear a story or we walk through a forest and there's something that speaks to us and we allow it to move us through the heart. And we get taken over by it almost, like it really, and it starts to plant its roots. And I have this question about like wanting to grab that, wanting to take hold of it, own it, solidify it, make sure it never goes away. There's a fear that I will lose that when I feel it. Can you speak to that? Is that something that you've experienced before, or you've witnessed in others? What's going
absolutely.
on there?
Because, it's a different part it's very much connected to when you think of dreams, like we wake up in the morning and there was this dream and we're trying to grasp it. And in the moment we're trying to grasp it, it disappears. It's almost like a shy animal,
Yeah.
And only when we develop the skill of waking up in a way that we keep of half in the state of slumber and stay gentle, whispering to the dream still, we can keep some of the images that we had or the realizations that we had in this dream. So I find it's very similar when we have these states of, like an archetypal quality coming in and it filling us up with, a beautiful, exquisite ecstasy. And it will not stay if that part, it's like a dance between our personal self doesn't trust that this is just there, it's not going away, it's not going anywhere. But something in our humanness that knows the fleeting of things, the things are dying, things are moving away, nothing's permanent. So we try to grasp, The soul is much more connected to something that is impermanent and there forever. So it teaches us a lot about trust. And only from that place of trust that, there you are. And I can meet you whenever, because I know that you are there. If I'm in the right state of openness, but it will flee, eventually, if we're trying to make it ours. It's not a world for the copyrights. That's also something that I find so beautiful about it. It's not something that we can own and put a flag down and a stake. So I've discovered a little real estate in the imaginary world and claim this is mine, like we traveled to the moon and made it ours. And now, the inner worlds, it's given to everyone, and that's the beautiful thing. It's almost also connected to zeitgeist. There's something hovering in the collective consciousness that's there. And then at some points, we know that in history, at some points, there's a few inventors, that develop a certain interest for downloading how do you produce electricity at the same time, or how do you fly? And one of them will make it first. But there's always a few people doing it at the same time, right? So there's something that we can connect to. It's almost like a cloud of insight that's there and that we as humans, if we open our channels, can tap into. And I feel the same is true for mythology, to come back to that subject, because what is subject, like people who have studied mythology deeply have found that in every culture, the way mythology formed was that a tribe got together and they dreamed and they shared the dreams with each other. And then certain themes were there in common. And then they kept this theme and worked with it. And then 100 years later, if that theme was still alive, they kept working with it, and other themes just dropped away because they didn't have relevance. So mythology is something that's grinded like rocks in a riverbed over centuries, to make them round and little soft pebbles, as if the waters of the world are sucking these pebble stones to make them digestible, and so there is an essence that's brought down. It's like the arcanum that lives inside all these stories and myths, that is eternal and that has survived so many ages. And the outer frame of these stories has changed according to, political systems. The priests have put their versions on top. And so when we strip away the outer layers of these stories and try to go into, the core of it, actually what we find is something that's the same all over the planet. That's the same truth of how we live and what life is for and what we're here for as humans on this planet in all the traditions. And that's the beauty. Yeah. And we have all, sewn our individual clothing for these global truths.
Yeah, the anarchist in me, or the person in me who's distrustful of stories that feel conventional, wonders whether the core of these myths is really just the storyline of the most powerful through line through history. Like, it just reflects the lineage of people who held power. Maybe some people might refer to that as largely patriarchal in the last couple of thousand years. So maybe some people might say, and a part of me wants to say, isn't a myth, in the way that we're formed like a rock in a river over time, just really carrying on the most conventional storyline coming through? Isn't this just the story that's been passed down from the top person to the next top person? Isn't that how it has been retained? Or is that a distortion? I'm sensing I've got something distorted there.
Yeah. Well, I feel you're right about the outer coating of the stories. They have been for sure very patriarchal in the last 2,000 years, especially coming from the Western, culture, tradition, religion, background. But when you go deeper, like at the core of these stories, behind those are mythologies that are much more ancient, and that, if you follow down the track, there's actually matriarchal, traditions, and they all have the same seed. Yeah. So I do find it's about the coating, it's the coating. And I do feel that, especially at our time when the old systems are kind of crumbling and we're trying to bring through a new culture and a new paradigm, it's good to investigate that. Like, what are the stories we live by that are keeping us encaged in old belief systems? Because stories keep us trapped so much. And when we speak about mythology and the old stories, that's just one aspect. Part of my life, I was working in media, and like as a journalist, how much there is mythology also forming nowadays around, what we believe in politically, socially, what are our current myths that are just emerging now, and the stories that are told by the powers of today. So I wouldn't limit the word mythology around, the ancients. I would say, we are living in a mythology that's a creation myth that's ongoing. And so it's our task really to pay attention to what are these stories and how do they keep us enslaved to a certain degree, in a certain mindset. And this is where I'm so passionate, is because I do believe if we unlock those keys, then actually from that place of where the seed is, that is love and freedom, or whatever words you put there, from that place you could begin to rewrite the new mythology, a new story that would actually empower humanity, that could empower every individual to be, in direct relationship with source and in direct communion with nature, with all beings, and from that place create the new myth that we do want to live with.
Yeah. So in this way, myth is like the current, the contemporary, the current life pulse, the pulse of life coming through us. It's sensing that this idea of source is really with us currently. We don't have to go to another location to find it. We don't need to go to another point in time to find this source. But it's really with us presently. It feels like it's different way, like very poetic ways of speaking about it. It's kind of like a frequency that we can feel, we can maybe sense in some way. Maybe it is the soul coming through. Maybe when we read a story or a poem or listen to a piece of music, we just sense a frequency in it. And it's hard to put our finger, it's precisely difficult to put our finger on it because it's finding its way. It's just bubbling, it's pulsing, and it's there for us if we kind of allow ourselves to remain open to that thing that it's.
And it is so much.
Yes.
Sorry. I'm the power issues that we all carry. We have all power issues because we all sense that some outer power has taken charge of our stories. And so to reclaim our own direct connection to source, to the source of our story, of our soul mythology, is a way to reclaiming our power, how we live in this world. So it changes the whole, power dynamics in the world if we are all not looking outside for the answers, for the solutions, for someone to give us permission to live in a certain way or telling us to live in a certain way. So that's why I feel it's so important to reclaim our story.
Reclaiming our story. So, speaking to someone who feels like they're very maybe stuck in their personal self, maybe they feel like someone else has taken control of their stories, or that they're just being fed other people's stories. If you're speaking to someone who doesn't feel open to soul coming through, maybe wants to be, and therefore feels as though they can't express their soul as it's coming through, how would you guide that person to maybe, one, feel that sense of openness, and two, come to express what wants to move through them, come to express their feeling of connection to source? How would you speak to that person?
I think the first step would be to create space inside, and space in the inner worlds can be created, It's very, very classical way is meditation, just to create space between the thoughts, and notice where are these thinking patterns, just being witness to your own thinking process. Where are these thinking patterns of going repetitively in the same direction? And where am I just repeating some outer story, some outer belief system? And the other is through the body, is through by being in nature, by being, releasing also using the tools that we teach in ISTA, also emotional release, creating space in the body, moving the body, inhaling, breathing, dancing, opening up the cellular level so that it can bring in some, that there is spaciousness for new energy to come in, so that the grass and the flower and the tree can actually have a space to come and communicate. And once there is space, then, just a period of deep listening, just having a daily practice of an hour of stillness in, whatever works best. People can experiment, people work in different ways, but can be just sitting, communing with, like Goethe did, for example, just sitting with a plant for a year and just watching it. Amazing. I have never done that, I have to admit, but there's a longing in me to dedicate a year to one specific plant. But, like you get the idea of just having a communion with nature and allowing it to transmit and opening the senses. I think our senses, our physical senses, are a portal for our soul. So doing practices that augment our receptivity, our sensuous receptivity. Practices that then, like once the outer senses are more open, once we smell deeply, taste deeply, we can, those senses also activate in the inner worlds, and the imagination starts becoming alive as a result of that. So being through the physical body in touch with the physical world has an impact on the inner world and its connection to the subtle realms.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I'm thinking of two things as you're speaking. One is somewhere in your bio, I think, where you refer to imagining with the heart, which seems contradictory, because as we've been saying, like maybe we're very accustomed to imagining with our mind, but this sense of like coming through the body, creating space, and then enhancing, augmenting our receptivity, as you say, and then realizing that our imagination or our soul can move through not just our mind or what we do with logos, but can even move through our heart. And we don't have a lot of language to explain what's going on there, I guess.
That's right. I mean, the many traditions call the heart the portal to the soul. So they say that for a reason. For example, the Sufis call that faculty of imagination of the heart himma. And so with himma, the heart projects its love outwards onto an object, and that one speaks back. So there is a communion, and communion in the real sense of a shared experience that is not so much more like I and you, like me and a person or me and an object. There's something happening in the space between. And it's acknowledging that there is almost like a third being that is beginning to speak in the space between two. When it's not like I'm observing you and, like I'm the superior human like looking at you. But there's something of genuine curiosity and naivety, like the the divine child looking at its divine companion and just feeling and sensing what is there. And some people's hearts respond with images as an answer, and some people with sounds. Some people, in a sensuous level, they feel. So people work in different ways. So imagination is something that can reveal itself in different ways for different people. So also for those who don't get an image, not to be frustrated, because there is information also when you're in deep communion and there is a specific sound coming and that touches something and alters the frequency we are communicating with.
Yeah, what you're describing there really reminds me of conversations with some people in the ISTA field in particular, where you just feel really dropped in, quote unquote, this term dropped in. You feel like you've entered to some kind of, I want to say paranormal or alternative, or just deeper, more subtle, more receptive place of reality with that person. And you're just sort of, maybe you're just using your tone of voice. Maybe you've slowed down a little bit. You're not trying to provoke any ideas in the other person. You're not trying to have them understand you. You're just tapping into something that feels completely made of the material of life that we're used to, the sounds and the shapes of my mouth as I'm talking things. But they just get more, there's more space between them. There's other frequencies going on. And it feels so rich. It feels so full. It feels like I have everything I need in that space. And if you were to view it from the outside, it would look like two people huddled together, having a conversation and talking about nothing. But it's so lush. It's such a beautiful place to be. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's what you're saying resonates so much with me. Like one of my passions is like, the sacred word, like there is in my, I perceive there's a lot of noise in the world, there's so much noise when you put your antennas out and a lot of how people speak and communicate is very penetrative. It comes from a place of, I need to tell you this. And, like the voice gets to a higher pitch and it's penetrating into other people. And that's very different from what you just described, is like a voice that's kind of vibrating something from the heart. And there, it doesn't matter so much which words are spoken, because words are a vehicle for the vibration, and words are important and they carry, their, power. But the vibration with which these words are spoken lands then in the person who is receiving that word in a way that the person can really, that doesn't need to be, like, okay, I'm surrendering, but it's actually okay, I'm taking this in. I'm opening my pores to your words. I'm opening my skin to be permeable to whatever comes from you. And that's a more embodied way of speaking that's not just mental, but it's actually vibrating through the whole body. And it's a way of communicating that has an equal position for the speaker and the listener.
Yeah.
And where the speaker is actually honoring the listener and creating a way with the words and the sound through vibration, so that the words can land deeply, and stop the words also when there's a sense of, okay, the cup is filled. I don't need to overstimulate you.
Yeah.
And it's like that word abracadabra I create as I speak. It's like I create relationship by the way I'm speaking. Also, it's the words, but it's also the way we use the words and the way we use our body to let music generate the music of the spheres, become part of the music of the spheres, which is a creative life force. And we know how science has discovered that we can, that different words create a different symmetry, a different form. When you speak them in sand, there's a different shape that appears. So to be aware of that, like we're actually creating form as we speak.
Yeah. So gorgeous. So what I'm hearing is that it's beautiful to read myths that have maybe been written down, stories, but almost to take them with a grain of salt, or imagine ourselves to be on a level footing with the person who's telling the story, to find our own way through that world that we're reading, if it is or that we're watching, if we're watching a film, a mythological kind of film, and just feel how it lands with us. And then I'm also hearing that we can treat a walk through the countryside as the reading of a myth, as a mythological experience that we can harvest so much from. And that that myth is actually asking us to fully engage in it in order for us to be able to soak up what it's wanting to transmit to us, open our pores to it in that way. And that a conversation can be a mythological landscape as well.
Beautifully said. Yeah, exactly. I think it's about inspiration, like when we delve into the old myths, then we can go into opposition and say like, oh, well, I don't think like that, or we can go to a greater place and think like, wow, that's great inspiration. Like I'm not in total alignment with, like the patriarchal overlay that story has, but like we also can have a greater understanding for, oh, those were the circumstances of that time. And it has this, like one or two things that I love about it. And they inspire me. And I'm going to just like take them in and breathe them in. And then I'm going for a walk and I'm seeing a couple of mushrooms there and their inspiration. And like just meeting life as inspiration, that rather than opposites or things that I'm against or that I'm, judging, and treat it all as, oh, that's good information. Or, like I dislike something and that's information too about myself eventually, like, why do I dislike that? So, like what's the wiring inside of me that goes into polarization with that idea or that being or that creature? So what do I need to integrate sometimes, because I go into, oh, I just like that because I haven't integrated that aspect of myself. So everything's information, everything's inspiration, if you want. And out of that huge arena of possibilities, I then become a creator of, okay, but what is the life I want to create, And I don't need to impose that on anyone. It's just like, like life begins to flower. Just like, when you work in the gardens, it's like a flower just comes out and it's just like, oh, not a flower. I'm going to be the most pretty flower as far as I can see, And that's very innocent and beautiful. And it's not a power struggle with any other flower in the garden. So from that place, just treating life as like, oh, how can I be the most fullest expression of that essence that I came here to be?
That just so beautiful, so incredible. And as we come to the end of our conversation, we could go on forever. I think that's a beautiful, beautiful place to leave it. I hope that people listening to this episode are feeling like there are some seeds in this conversation that we've had that they can go on and plant and continue to explore these ideas that we've been talking about. Is there anything before we finish that you feel like is still bubbling, that still wants to be landed here? Any final thoughts that you would share on this topic?
Or just like, I'm just going to share that in Greek mythology, at the beginning there was night, and Nyx is the goddess of the night. And, there's different versions as always, but in that version that I love, Nyx was there in a cave and she started singing and rumbling and making noises. And in that music that she produced, she gave birth to Eros. And Eros actually then, like, he's one of the gods who was born first, and Eros being born first, out of the night, out of darkness, out of the not knowing, Eros created relationship, so Eros brought people together, concepts together. Eros is not just sexuality. Eros is like magnetism, is bringing together what's, wanting to meet. So that's the beauty of that mythology, is we have, like the invocation of greater life coming through as Nyx does, and then Eros actually brings it into form, into body. So I love that those two are at the very beginning of this creation myth in Greece.
Amazing. Wow. Yeah. Wow. Thank you for sharing that story. That is really resonant for where I feel like we're at right now. Thank you. Yeah. If people want to experience more of your teaching or follow up with you, how can they do that? Where you've got some retreats coming up, different trainings. What's maybe this summer of 2023? Where will you be?
I will be in Norway with you, Simon, and that will be in June, if I remember right. So that would be a very special ISTA training because we're seeding the training there in Norway. I'll also be in Sweden and in Germany later in the year. And then there will also be the 6 weeks temple training that we're doing in Samothraki in Greece, which is really about what we were speaking earlier. It's about how to shift your life from living from personality to living as a soul in this world. And how do it's actually a training for people who want to give their life to something greater than making a good life for themselves, landing the new paradigm and creating the new codes for the new civilization. So those are the main things. And you can find my website is paradisecodes.net.
Say that again.
You can find all. It's paradisecodes.net.
Amazing. Right. So that's Ashisha's website. And for the ISTA trainings, ista.life. Yeah. The traditional way for us to finish an episode of the Spiritual Sexual Shamanic podcast is to ask our interviewees some quick fire questions. Are you up for it, Ashisha?
Okay, let's go.
In 5 words or less, what is your go-to karaoke song?
Leonard Cohen, If It Be Your Will.
Wowie. Are you an early bird or a night owl?
A night owl.
What's the last plant that you planted?
A tulip, just today.
It's spring.
I did, really. It's springtime.
It's spring.
Yes.
What's the first book that comes to your mind right now?
I don't actually know the name. It's Abrams, something about the census. I keep forgetting titles. David Abrams' Census.
Okay.
I just started reading it. I forget the title. Yeah.
Incredible.
Yeah.
What did you have for dinner last night?
I had zucchini, mashed potatoes, and some, olives, feta cheese, and nibbles. Yeah.
I love it. I love it. Where in the world would your secret hideout be if you had to have one?
Well, I do have one, and that's in Samothraki on this Greek island. And it is really a hideout because this island is supposed to be like the ancient mythology says it's the island beyond time and space. So, and I really always feel that when I come here and I take the ferry to this island, then I feel like I've left the world and I am in a different dimension. So yeah, that's my hideout.
Amazing. And finally, if you were a piece of furniture, what would you be?
Oh, a lampshade. Oh, a lamp of some sort. A lamp. I don't know what. A standing lamp. I'm seeing a standing lamp. A lamp with a shade.
Incredible. I can see it.
Yeah.
Ashisha, thank you so much
amazing.
for such a wonderful conversation. Yeah.
Thank you, Simon.
Yeah, it's been such a pleasure. And I can't wait to be with you in Norway this summer and for speaking with you again next time.
Look forward to that.
Yeah.
Thanks, Simon.
Bye.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the Spiritual, Sexual, Shamanic podcast. To find out more about ISTA's retreats, online festivals, or to work with our faculty, visit our website, ISTA.life, or find us on Facebook at ISTA.life and on Instagram at ISTA_tribe.